Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. A lot of animals are active during the night, and in this video I want to talk about different possibilities to capture wildlife footage at night and how major productions and myself deal with the circumstances and how you can too. I'm David and I'm a nature filmmaker and ecologist from Germany. This video is for all of my fellow making of geeks who just love to see how films are made, as well as tech nerds and nature filmmakers who are interested in this topic. There are several reasons for a nocturnal activity pattern of animals. For example, in Germany, there is and was always a high hunting pressure over hundreds of years. So a lot of actual diurnal animals are active when there is no light outside. Other reasons are that some species want to avoid their natural predators, or they are the predators and predate at night, or they want to avoid environmental factors like high temperatures, or they have a special mating behavior that works just in the dark. So a lot of natural activity happens in nature when you can't see it. As a nature filmmaker, I want to show all facets of the life and the behavior of my target species. For example, currently I work on the biggest nature documentary about the common hamster worldwide, and hamsters are cathumeral, so they are active at day and night. So this is an important part of the behavior I want to show in my film. So what are my options to capture the part of the behavior that happens at night? At first, maybe you want to think about the visible artificial lighting, like LED lights, spotlights or something similar. Especially in nature photography sector, there's still an ongoing debate about the use of visible artificial lighting, like flashes for example. Personally, I'm not a big fan of flashlights in nature photography. For me, I'm just a guest in nature and I really want to avoid scaring or disturbing animals with my work. And this may be just a short moment, but it is not necessary at all. And in film, you would need to leave the light on permanently. So yeah, what are my options how we can avoid artificial light? Fortunately, in professional nature filmmaking, there's not such a debate like in photography. When nature filmmaking started years ago, artificial light was used, but now we have a common ground not to use artificial lights when filming animals like mammals or birds. One of the main reasons is that you don't want to influence the behavior of the animal by your film and technique itself. Or, and this would be the worst case, to scare the animal off. When you illuminate an animal which normally acts in darkness, it will change its behavior. And in high-class documentaries, you want to capture real behavior. You want to discover behavior patterns never seen before. And this is not possible when you as a filmmaker change the way the animal acts. To sum this up, we can say some time ago artificial light was the only way to capture wildlife at night. It is part of our history of making wildlife films, but we are living in good times where you have an ongoing development of totally crazy technology and software. I would say there are four main categories of how you can film wildlife at night and in darker conditions. Low light sensitive cameras, long exposure shots, infrared light sensitive cameras, and thermal cameras. So let's start with the most easy way to film in darker conditions. You can simply choose a camera that performs very well in low light conditions. Low light sensitive cameras are a good option when you have some kind of residual light, for example at dusk or dawn, or in full moon conditions. This is a good option for crepuscular animals. They are most active at dusk and dawn. I think a good and affordable choice would be the Sony A7S or the Panasonic Lumix S1H or Lumix S5 Mark II. The Sony A7S, for example, was used in Netflix Planet Earth 2. In combination with a lens with a wide open aperture, it is a suitable option. It is not a documentary, but recently I've also heard that the creator, a major Hollywood film, was almost entirely shot on the Sony FX3. And one reason for this choice was because of the good low light capabilities of this camera. In post-production, you can use a noise reduction tool to refine your footage. In my own productions, I use the one from Neat Video, which is really powerful. It also gives me like acceptable results with footage of my main camera, which is really not a low light performer. If you are interested in a second video that dives deeper into my post-production process of night videos, let me know it in the comments. A camera I am really looking forward to is the upcoming Canon MS500. The new Canon MS500 is, according to the press release of Canon, the first ultra high sensitive interchangeable lens camera. There aren't many sample pictures out there, but what is on the internet looks quite fascinating. In my understanding, the camera produces color pictures in total darkness without any noise. This is due to the used SPAD sensor. In contrast to like a normal CMOS sensor, the sensor has no electronic noise during the special readout, by which the camera counts every single photon which is entering every individual pixel. This camera is mainly meant to be used in an industrial or like military environment. Some possible use cases Canon is mentioning is, for example, border or harbor control scenarios at night, but as often military equipment can also be used in wildlife filmmaking. And I think the camera has the potential to play a big part in future wildlife documentaries. The huge downside of the camera, which is to be, I think, released this year, is the price of around $25,000, which should be no problem for renting in a big blue chip production for several days. But for me as an independent filmmaker working with low budgets, it is more of an issue. So let's come to the long exposure shots. Actually, long exposure is more a photography technique. Of course, you can use it also in film by adjusting your shutter angle or your shutter speed. But normally you work with the 180-degree shutter rule. To break this shortly down, this means you double the number of your frame rate and get your shutter speed in hundredths. One example, with my main camera, I always film with 59.94 frames per second, so my shutter speed must be somewhere around 1 to 120. When you lower your shutter speed or increase your shutter angle, the picture gets brighter. So easily say you can film in darker conditions, but be aware that you also get more motion blur if you lower your shutter speed. This can create interesting effects, mostly known from photography. In just a very few moments, I minimized my shutter speed drastically. I used it, for example, when I filmed this mating of fireflies to capture their behavior at night, to absolutely minimize my use of artificial light. What is more common for my work is to use long exposure shots for time lapses. This might sound awkward for you, because a time lapse condenses time, and with a long exposure picture you put more action in one photo. But it is necessary when you think, for example, about Milky Way time lapses. This kind of time lapses is a fixed component in my major films. Here I use, for example, exposure times of around 25 seconds for one single picture. And when you make a photo every 30 seconds, you need 25 minutes to get 1 second of film when you are working with a frame rate of 50 frames per second. So usually you are hours outside at night to make such a time lapse. But I think it's a very cool and atmospheric way to capture the night sky. Another example when I used long exposure shots is again a sequence of fireflies. Here I used long exposure photos of fireflies to show the flight path of them. To use it in my documentary, I animated this path to imitate their flight. Now we come to a more uncommon solution, the use of near-infrared sensitive cameras. This technique was also used in Planet Earth 2. Here they used a red camera without the infrared cut filter. but maybe we have to look shortly into the theory again to understand this. The visible light spectrum, so the light we can see with our eyes, ranges from 380 nanometers to 750 nanometers. But the visible light is just a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. There's also the infrared spectrum, which you can use for filming under some special circumstances. The infrared spectrum is divided into the near, middle and far infrared light. Most common digital cameras on the market have a built-in infrared cut filter. It is often in a blue hue and located somewhere between your lens and the sensor. When filming in daylight, it makes a lot of sense to have a IR filter built in because they block near infrared light and some of the light from the longer red wavelengths. This kind of filter is one of the reasons why you see the picture out of the camera like you see it with your own eyes. But in contrast to our eyes, the sensors of most of these cameras are still sensitive to infrared light. So in theory, you can turn almost every camera into an infrared sensitive camera just by removing the IR cut filter. In addition, you have to use an infrared light source to illuminate your scenery because you have no other normal light, natural light, and the result is quite fascinating. Depending on the wavelength you use for your infrared light source, the light is completely invisible or almost invisible for humans. But attention, it is not invisible for all animals. One example are goldfish, which can see infrared and ultraviolet light. There are some species that can maybe not always see but sense this kind of technology. For example, vampire bats have thermoreceptors which allow them to sense warmth and thus where blood might be most close to the surface. It is similar for mosquitoes. There's also a number of snakes that can detect heat sources, so you have to be very good informed for which species you can use this technique. In the last years we worked with external infrared spotlights which have a wavelength of 940 nanometers, which has also no red glow. I converted some cameras into near infrared cameras to film at night, and it's always an operation at the heart of your camera, and I'm always happy when I'm finished without damaging the camera and the sensor. You have to be aware that the removal of the infrared filter is more or less irreversible, but you can still use a spin-off IR filter to go back to an almost normal picture. The use of infrared light are a technique used in some productions. Here, for example, they placed a lot of powerful infrared lights on a truck and drove parallel to their subject while filming with a IR modified camera. By the way, tray cameras use the same technique and also work with an infrared sensitive sensor and infrared LEDs. They use either almost or total invisible infrared light to illuminate their scenery. They are labeled as low glow or no glow LEDs. As a rule of thumb, you can say that you get better results with low glow, so not total invisible light. The downside is that also the animals can see a light red glow of the LEDs in the camera. However, this light does not illuminate the surroundings. In our production we use both low and no glow infrared LEDs depending on the target species and our main technique setup. When using infrared sensitive cameras at night with an artificial light source, you only get black and white footage out of your camera. In the last years I did a lot of research by finding a good technique to colorize this black and white footage via artificial intelligence. I read papers and tried almost every method or platform which is available on the market. For me, AI colorization is the future of infrared night videography. Based on a lot of factors and a lot of samples, the artificial intelligence is guessing the colors in the pictures, and depending on the algorithm, the results are good or not that good. Most of the algorithms are trained on historical black and white pictures, which is a problem for us as wildlife filmmakers, because while the results can be excellent for an historical portrait, they might turn out less than ideal for a picture illuminated with infrared light. The next problem is that most algorithms are designed for photos and not for videos. But some weeks ago I found a new platform called Palette, which is my newest hope to achieve high quality results to colorize black and white footage. But let's see what the future brings with AI colorization. And as I mentioned, I am planning a future video on post-production, so maybe I can show there then more. So let's come to the last one, the thermal cameras or mid to far infrared cameras. Thermal, thermographic or mid-far infrared cameras create an image using infrared light in the wavelength from 1000 nanometers to about 14,000 nanometers. Generally speaking, the higher an object's temperature, the more infrared radiation is emitted. A thermal camera can detect this radiation in a way similar to the way an ordinary camera detects visible light. Because ambient light level does not matter, this kind of cameras even works in total darkness, which makes them the perfect choice for nature filmmaking. Images from infrared cameras tend to be monochrome because the cameras generally use an image sensor that does not distinguish different wavelengths of the infrared radiation. To display the changes in the signal itself, the monochromatic images can be displayed in pseudocolor. For example, a very commonly used color scale shows the measured temperatures from white to black, where the brightest, so the warmest parts of the image are colored white, intermediate temperatures reds and yellows, and the dimmest, so the coolest parts of the picture are black. The resolution of thermal cameras is usually much lower than that of optical cameras, so the resolution of consumer thermal cameras is often not higher than 60 to 120 or 320 to 240 pixels. Sometimes more expensive cameras can achieve a resolution of 1280 to 1024 pixels. Basically, you have two types of thermal cameras: uncooled and cooled infrared detectors. Uncooled thermal cameras use a sensor operating at ambient or close to ambient temperature by using small temperature control elements. So they do not need large coolers, which makes them usually smaller and less costly. On the other hand, usually they have a very low resolution and are not that sensitive, which results in a lower image quality than in cooled detectors. Until now, I only worked with uncooled thermal cameras. The solution I used a few times is the FLIR T1020 with a variety of 4 different lenses. When I say this system is cheaper than a cooled camera, we talk about a starting price of 56,000 euros for the camera and 4 lenses. So the limitations are the resolution, and you also have to crop the picture because you can get rid of the overlay, or maybe I didn't find a way to do it. Afterwards, you have to do post-processing by upscaling the pictures, and yeah, another downside is that you cannot operate with very long zoom lenses. Let's come to the cooled thermal cameras. As the name indicates, cooled thermal cameras use an active cooling system where the detector is typically contained in a vacuum-sealed case and is cryogenically cooled. Operation temperature of most modern cooled detectors are -213 to -173 degrees Celsius, depending on type and performance level. The cooled sensors are much more sensitive, so they also can be operated with long zoom lenses and higher frame rates than uncooled cameras. Cooled infrared cameras are much more expensive than uncooled infrared cameras, but they have just an incredible image quality in comparison to the uncooled cameras. I did a ton of research to find out which cooled thermal cameras were used in the top wildlife documentaries of the BBC, National Geographic or Netflix, because the footage they have just looked incredible. It looks so good that some viewers commented that they think it was not real film but animated. After hours of searching, I found the company and the system behind the cameras. It is no system you can buy in a shop or something, so it's not free available. It is built by Leonardo and their subsidiary company called Selex, ESLSC. So they are UK based, and from my understanding they mainly produce high-end military technology, but also aerospace, space and other highly classified technique. So the thermal cameras used for the top-notch wildlife documentaries are built around these military systems. And one of them is the SLX Merlin thermal imaging camera. This kind of system was used, for example, in Planet Earth 2 or Netflix Earth at Night series. So the image quality is just awesome. It is obviously so good that it is now used in the Challenger 2 tanks of the British Army. Unfortunately for me, it is probably way too expensive even to rent. I didn't find a price tag for this awesome system, but you can be sure that it is a price with 6 or maybe even more figures. To sum this video up, there are a variety of technology and techniques available to film wildlife at night. So there's no need to use visible artificial lighting. You have to choose what suits the conditions, the budget, your creative vision and your target species the best. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you want to see more about nature and wildlife filmmaking, and maybe you can leave a thumbs up. See you, bye bye.